Well, good day again, everybody, and welcome to part 4 and the final of In the Beginning. In part 3, I gave you some limiting factors of why the Earth and the universe cannot be billions of years old. In part 4, we will carry on with this and other topics. Mostly, I will give you irrefutable proof that evolution could not have happened. Right. The psalmist says in Psalms 39 verse 3, "While I was musing, the fire burned." Here it is again. "I remember the days of old. I meditate on all thy works. I muse on the works of thy hands." Did you know the word muse is used twice in the Bible? It means to think. In English, usually, when you put the letter A in front of a word, it usually means the opposite of that word. Like with theist and atheist. So if muse means to think, then amuse means the opposite. They built entire parks where you can pay to go and do that, not think. Call it amusement parks. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. What is man that thou art mindful of him, and that the Son of Man that thou visiteth him? You know, a person who spends his time considering what God has done is not impressed with what man can do. Think about that. Just go and have a look at some teenagers' bedrooms today on the walls. If it is plastered with posters of their sport heroes, like the Springboks and Proteas and so on, then we are training them to be mindful of what man can do. Amusement. Right, I know I already said this in a prior video, but you know that it's been estimated that there are enough stars for every individual on Earth to own 11 trillion of them just to themselves. And that's only the stars that we know about. They found a dark spot in space, and they took the Hubble's telescope and focused on this spot. The zone was viewed continuously for 10 days straight. The area they focused on was 1/30th the size of a full moon. That is 1/30th the size of the full moon, or about the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. It's a very small piece of sky that they focused on for 10 days long. They found that there are more stars in that spot than can be counted. Isn't that amazing? Now that's something to consider or to muse about, the works of God. The Bible says, "Or speak to the earth, and it shall teach thee, and the fishes of the sea shall declare unto thee." That's Psalms 8 verse 4. Right, so the earth is a big magnet, we know this, and like all magnets, it's losing its strength over time. You see, the earth's magnetic field declines 10% in the last 150 years. It declined overall of 40% in the last 1,000 years. So if it is losing its magnetic field, and can therefore not be it cannot therefore be billions of years old. This is because if you go back in time, the magnetic field is stronger and stronger the further back you go, to the point where it is too strong for life to exist here. It also proves that carbon dating cannot work as a method of dating fossils, because carbon dating is directly proportionate to the magnetic field. Because as the magnetic field declines, more radiation gets in, and that is what forms carbon-14. But more on that in a later video. I just wanted to make sure that you understand carbon dating is not accurate at all. In 1949, when they invented carbon dating, the lower leg of a mammoth they found in Fairbanks Creek dated 15,000 years old. And the skin of the same mammoth dated to 21,000 years old. Interesting. And it gets worse as time goes on. In 1975, one part of the Velocevich mammoth dated 29,000 years old, and another part of it dated 44,000 years old. Sure. What they're trying to tell us as well, like in this textbook, is that the magnetic field's declining is just part of a pattern of reversals, and that at some point it would flip over. No one has a clue of how it even could reverse. There is no proof that it ever has whatsoever. And there are no magnetic reversals locked in the ocean floors either. What has been observed though for the last 150 years is that the magnetic field is declining. That is observable part, and it's called science. The rest is just theoretical. This is all part of another theory called the Pangaea. Sure, lots of you have heard of the Pangaea theory, as you can see on the screen here. This is where they say that all the continents used to fit together. They don't tell you that they had to shrink Africa 30 to 40% to make it fit with the others. And what happened to Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, Nicaragua? Where are they? They're not in Pangaea. Now, if you take the water out of the oceans, you will notice that there is dirt underneath. What do you mean the continents were connected? They still are connected. It's not hollow or under the oceans, or the continents can't drift like they want to tell you it does. I will cover this in some more videos later on as well. Now, the Earth is spinning over 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. Over 1,000 miles per hour, mind you. But it is slowing down. It is slowing down enough to create a problem. Every year to year and a half, they have to add a second to the clock to compensate for this. It's called a leap second. In 1990, this news journal said, but regular clocks use days as a measure, which are growing longer by 1,000th of a second or more daily as Earth's rotation slows. It's called a leap second. In 1992, Astronomy magazine said, Earth rotation is slowing down. June will be 1 second longer than normal, and this is what we call a leap second. Okay, so the Earth is spinning slower and slower. How many of you can figure out that this means that it used to go faster? Now, if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, this is no problem. I don't think Adam had a watch to check on it anyway. But the evolutionists want you to believe the Earth is billions of years old. I bet the world was spinning pretty fast millions of years ago. It would be day, night, day, night, day, night. You get up, go to bed, get up, go to bed, get up, go to bed. The centrifugal force would have been huge. The winds would have been 5,000 miles an hour from the Coriolis effect alone. And you think dinosaurs lived 200 million years ago? Maybe that's what happened to them. Pew! They shot right off of the Earth. Okay, so the Sahara Desert was or has what is called a prevailing wind pattern. The wind almost always blows the same way. This is problematic as the hot, dry air kills all the plants in the adjacent areas and turns it into more desert. It is called what we know as desertification. Right. They did quite a study on the Sahara Desert, and there is no question that it is growing. So, after years of study, they concluded that it is about 4,000 years old. I don't necessarily have a problem with this, but if the Earth is billions of years old, why do we not have a bigger, and therefore older, desert somewhere else? Would the biggest desert on Earth be 4,000 years old if the Earth is billions of years old? Here's a better theory. About 6,000 years ago, God created everything. Then, about 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. I think we can all agree that it is not possible to have a desert under a flood. See, the desert could not start forming until all the water has receded. Based on this theory of mine, I predict that the biggest and therefore the oldest desert on Earth would not be older than 4,400 years. And it is! Maybe the Bible is right, guys. Maybe the Bible is right. When they drill for oil, it is often found that the oil is under 20,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. Now, the people who study this effect say that some of this pressure is due to the weight of the rock and sediment that is over the pocket of oil. It is called the rock overburden. But the pressure of the oil is greater than the overburdened rock. Interesting. So it should have cracked the rock and equalized the pressure in less than 10,000 years. If the Earth is billions of years old, why do we still have oil pressure? Where did the actual oil come from in the first place? According to good science, oil comes from organisms that had been squished under enormous heat and pressure. According to good science, oil comes from organisms that has been squished under enormous heat and pressure. Excuse me. Back in 1971, 2 years before I was even born, they learned how to make oil in a laboratory. In 1996, Australia built a plant to turn sewage sludge into oil in just 30 minutes. They opened up a factory in Texas some years ago and produced oil from almost anything. They took turkey guts and turned it into oil with heat and pressure, according to Discover Magazine, 2003. They said, "We duplicate what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature took millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes." So the Sinclair Gas and Oil Company in America uses the dinosaur as its logo. They say that the dinosaur turned into oil, which I agree with, but then look at the logo on the right side there. It says mellowed 100 million years ago. I don't think so. Here's a better theory. I think about 6,000 years ago, God made everything. Then, about 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. The flood waters made sediment on an epic scale and buried the dinosaurs and all the other organisms under it. This squished the organisms, and through heat and pressure, it turned into oil. So if you used fuel today, whether for electricity or for your car, you were using your ancestors. Pouring petrol? Bye, Grandpa. Did you know in the Federal Center in Denver, Colorado, there is the U.S. National Ice Core Laboratory. Ice Core Laboratory. They go to Greenland and the South Pole, drill ice cores there, and then bring them here for study and as a record. This must be a government project. This is from another textbook. See the ice core they have just drilled right there? Inside this laboratory, they have many ice core samples, and they look like this. They look at the darker and the lighter parts, or rings if you want to call them that, and they look at it as almost like rings on a tree. Now, sorry, just 1 second. They basically say that in summer, when the snow melts, it freezes and it creates clear ice, which shows up dark like here in the picture, this dark area here. They say that in winter, it packs the snow and creates white ice. There's the white ice, you can clearly see it there in that arrow there. Right? They say that, in other words, this means that the intervals of dark and white ice are years. It means summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, and so on. Just like annual rings on a tree. They say in Greenland and Antarctica, where the weather is constantly dry and very cold, the glaciers are miles thick, but the annual rings are very thin. The deepest cores can measure over 10,000 feet. They drill 10,000 feet deep holes, and then they extract the core. The 10,000 feet cores from Greenland drilled since 1990 show the northern climate was erratic 135,000 years ago. So they see 135,000 years. Okay. They're assuming that these are annual rings. There is no proof of it except that the rings exist. They probably never heard of the Lost Squadron. I have a nice story for you coming next. Now, some airplanes in World War II ran out of gas, got lost and landed in Greenland somewhere. It's a very nice story, guys. I'm not sure if you can still find it on YouTube, but if you want to go and Google it, you should find it. Somewhere there was a series about it anyway. This is supposedly how they were supposed to fly and where they ended up in 1942. So a rich man from Kentucky had a brilliant idea to go and look for these planes and salvage it. Right. They used ground-penetrating radar to find these planes, as they were now covered with over 80 meters of ice. That's 263 feet of ice in only 48 years. Through a method called cold mining, they melted the ice down to the planes, took the planes apart to bring them back up through the hole and put them back together in Middlesburg, Kentucky. A few years later, the planes flew again for the first time in over 50 years. Great story, go check it out. Now, as they melted the hole to get to the planes, they went through ice rings. You can see it clearly on this picture here. Let me show you. All the rings they have here. See? Right. So, the airplanes were under the ice for 48 years, 1942 to 1990. The planes were under 263 feet of ice when they were found 48 years later. That means about 5.5 feet of ice accumulating on top of the planes per year. If 10,000 feet is the deepest hole that they drilled for an ice core, you divide it by 5.5 feet of accumulated ice per year and you end up with 1,824 years, not 135,000 years. And yes, deeper layers are compressed into finer layers due to the weight. So 4,400 years are really no problem for all the ice accumulated on the North and South Poles. Some would say that the planes were heavy and sank through the ice through the years. Well, this could not have happened. Please note that they would then have been found nose down, because the nose of the plane is the heaviest part. So if it did sink through the ice, it would have gone nose down. They found the planes actually horizontally as they parked them. Dr. Hovind met with Bob Cardin, who helped to dig up the planes, and asked him if he saw any rings in the ice going down to the plains. At 62 feet down, they hit plywood that was left over from a 1983 expedition to try and salvage them as well. So he asked him about the rings. Bob told him there were many hundreds of layers of ice above the plains when they dug them out. There's your answer. If evolution is true and these rings are each a year, how can there be hundreds of years of ice on top of the plains that landed there only 48 years ago? Bob told Dr. Hovind that the rings are not annual rings. He said that these rings form about 30 to 40 of them every 9 years. So these rings do not represent summer, winter. They represent warmer, colder times. How many of you visited Mossel Bay here in South Africa? Michael, I know you've never been there. You would know that if you have ever been in Mossel Bay, you can easily have all 4 seasons in one day. Cold, hot, warm, cold, and so on. Here is an article that still calls them annual layers. Either he is ignorant and did not do his research on the topic, or he is deliberately lying. You can have in winter, you can have warm times and colder times. And the same with winter and the same with summer, all the way around. That's why there's layers. It's not because of years. Now this guy is probably, is either ignorant or he's lying. I hope he's ignorant, because ignorance can be fixed. Unfortunately, stupid is forever. This guy, Michael, not you, Michael, this guy sent these pictures and wrote, Dr. Hovind saying, I got 15 layers of snow on my car in 8 hours. And there's a picture of the layers. 15 layers in just 8 hours. By the way, did you know that the Inuit Indians in Alaska, on the North Slope, have 42 to 43 words for snow? Not just one, not just the word snow. They've got 43 words for it. You see, these layers are not years or ages. They are simply hot and cold. It's the same with textbooks and the geological column. You get all the different layers, the ages in the layers of the rock. I'm sure you've heard of it. Here's a picture of a geological column. The Cretaceous era, the Jurassic era, the Triassic era, the Permian, the Devonian, etc., etc. The geological column is a joke, people. It's a joke, and I will talk more on that in a later video as well. But it's not legitimate to begin with. It was a big hoax. I think it was Mr. Charles Lyell. The rock layers are not different ages. All through the world you can find petrified trees, that's trees that turn to stone, through many of these layers. They want you to believe that these layers represent millions of years, yet these trees are connecting the layers. I'm sorry, but it simply cannot be. The layers you see all formed in one big flood. It also does not take long for things to petrify or to turn to stone, guys. This 30-foot petrified tree is one of hundreds found in the Kettles coal mines near Cookeville, Tennessee. The top and bottom are in different coal seams, dated thousands of years difference in age. So it stopped standing in so many thousand years old coal, and its bottom is in so many thousand years coal. So how did this tree die so long? How does it take so long for a tree to die? It just doesn't make sense. Here is a piece of petrified firewood. A child once put a bunch of acorns in a bucket of water. He wanted them to sprout and forgot the bucket in the backyard. In less than a year, they turned to stone. Doesn't take long for things to turn to stone, guys. Here is a petrified fish giving birth. It's in the act of giving birth, and it's petrified. It does not take millions of years to give birth. Thank the Lord. Here is a piece of petrified cowboy leg. You see, folks, it does not take millions or thousands of years to petrify things. But more on petrification later. The Mississippi River deposits sediment at a rate of 80,000 tons every hour. That's a lot of mud. 80,000 tons per hour. The delta in New Orleans is getting larger, obviously. There it is. And it is interesting. They studied the delta intensively. They drilled holes all over the place looking for oil as well. They estimate that the delta is about 30,000 years worth of accumulated mud. 30,000 years of mud at 80,000 tons per hour. If the earth is billions of years old, why isn't the whole Gulf of Mexico filled up by mud yet? Now the atheist will say, see, Mr. Creationist, there is 30,000 years worth of mud in that delta, and your Bible says that the earth is only 6,000 years old. Well, I have a theory about that delta. I believe that about 6,000 years ago, God made everything, and that about 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. This flood, as the water went down, it washed away about half of that mud in about 20 minutes. So it looks like it took 30,000 years, but they forgot about the flood. Dan Gunther wrote Dr. Hovind saying, Dr. Hovind, I am the pastor of Circle Baptist Church in Baker, LA. Recently, you did a seminar at Comet Baptist Church, something like that. But the important bit of what he wrote was, while working in the oil field, he used to work in the oil field, where we drilled through a tree of over 60 feet, almost 14,000 feet below the surface. There's a picture of how that can be done. They drilled deep, 14,000 feet deep. They hit a tree trunk standing up. They went into the tree trunk, and that tree trunk was 60 feet long. Now, people, most of the mud in that delta, is there due to a huge catastrophe called the flood. Okay? The oldest living tree is called the bristlecone tree, and is found in Southern California. Estimates of the age of this tree vary from 4,300 years old to 5,000 years old. It has been found that trees don't always produce one ring per year, by the way. It can have more. Some woodworkers that grow their own trees will tell you that 7-year-old trees will almost always have about 11 rings. Anyway, I have a question. If the earth is billions of years old, why do we not have a much older tree somewhere else? Why is the oldest tree in Southern California and it's 4,300 years old? Well, here's another theory. I believe that about 6,000 years ago, God made everything. Then, about 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. It wrecked just about everything, so the oldest tree in the world cannot be older than 4,400 years. Let's talk a little bit about barrier reefs, coral reefs. The biggest, largest coral reef on Earth is found off the coast of Australia and is called the Great Barrier Reef. Here's a picture of Australia and where the Barrier Reef is situated. During World War II, some of the reef was destroyed by ships and anchors and bombs and stuff like that. So the environmentalist wackos went down there to see how fast it's growing back. They watched the reef grow for 20 years. For 20 years. Must have been another government project. Based on a 20-year study, they concluded that the reef was less than 4,200 years old. So if the Earth is billions of years old, why don't we have a bigger reef someplace? Why would the biggest reef on Earth be less than 4,200 years old? Here's a theory. I'm sure you guys can figure out where I'm going with this, right? Okay. Let's see. Here's a picture of the Niagara Falls. The textbook says that the rocky ledge above Niagara Falls has been eroding for nearly 9,900 years. Okay, well, as the water how do they know that? How do they know that it's so old? Okay, well, let's find out. Well, as the water flows over the edge of the waterfall, it breaks some of the rocks off. So the water flows forward while the waterfall itself goes backwards. It erodes. They studied the Niagara Falls for the last 200 years and figured out that the waterfall moves back about 4.7 feet per year. It's pretty fast. Now, Charles Lyell in 1841 visited the falls. He said they were 10,000 years old based on 16 inch per year erosion. Charles Lyell said this on purpose, to discredit the Bible. And this book, the book that Charles Lyell wrote, is the book that ruined the faith of later Charles Darwin. Now, the people who lived in this area told Mr. Lyell that it happened much faster than that, but he didn't listen. The Niagara Gorge is about 7.5 miles long, as you can see in this picture. This textbook says that the 7.5 mile gorge took 9,900 years to carve. So if the Earth is billions of years old, why have the falls not eroded all the way back to Lake Erie yet? Why is the Niagara Falls right there? Well, there's another theory. I believe that about 6,000 years ago, God made everything, that about 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. As the flood waters receded, about half of that gully washed out in about 20 minutes. Did you know 30% of rainwater runs off to the oceans? The rest evaporates or soaks into the ground. On its journey to the ocean, it washes salts off the ground called mineral salts. The water in the oceans evaporate and the salt water runs into the ocean all the time in a circle. So the salt stays behind when the water evaporates, making the sea salty. That means that the ocean is getting saltier every day. Today the oceans are 3.6% salt, which could easily have happened in less than 5,000 years. The evolutionist wants to know how the freshwater fish survived the flood. They assume that the water of the flood was salt water. The answer is that the flood was mostly fresh water. Now they ask, how did the saltwater fish or saltwater creatures survive in the freshwater flood? Well, I think what probably happened is that the sea creatures slowly adapted to their new environment. As the sea became saltier, the creatures adapted. Like today, we have a fresh and saltwater crocodiles. Now the evolutionist would say, see evolution changing the croc to become seawater crocs. No, it's not. Changing from a freshwater crocodile to a saltwater crocodile is a minor change compared to the evolutionist myth. They teach that the rock changed into a croc. David Clifton of Oak Grove said that he had worked with aquariums all his life. He took black mollies, which is a freshwater fish, there's a picture of it, and slowly added sea salt to their aquarium. After just 2 weeks, they had become saltwater fish. Same fish, still swimming around in saltwater, fully adapted. When put back into freshwater, suddenly they died in 30 minutes. They adapted to their saltwater environment. Doesn't take thousands of millions of years either. I recently took my sons, Michael will recall, to the caves in the so-called cradle of humankind here in South Africa. Took them to the Sterkfontein caves. This is a picture of some stalactites formations in these caves, and it's very beautiful and very impressive. That I will admit. They call stalagmites and stalactites. They call these two stones flow stones. The guide at this caves say that they use uranium dating to see how old these caves are. That's where they take the sample of the flowstone and test it with the uranium test. They concluded that the caves are 2 million years old from these flowstones. So these stalactites and stalagmites are 2 million years old. It takes 2 million years to form. According to self-professed infidel Dave Matson, the Bulletin of National Speleological Society gave their observed growth rates as ranging from 0.1 to 10 centimeters. That's 2.5 inches per 1,000 years. They say that these flowstones can form 2.5 inches, but it takes thousands of years. Okay? I don't think so. Here are some 50-inch stalactites, 50-inch, under the Lincoln Memorial. The memorial was built in 1922 and the photo was taken in the 1960s. It took only 50 years for it to grow. That's an inch per year. Not 2.5 inches per 1,000 years. Here's a bat that was covered in flowstone before it could even decay or rot. It doesn't take millions of years for this stuff to form, people. The refrigeration shed, this one in the picture, was built in 1926. In 1927, it had 2-inch stalactites. This building in Indiana is 40 years old. This is what could be found in its basement. Look at that. There is a mine in Australia that was closed down for 55 years. When they reopened it, they found huge flowstone formations in just 55 years. See where the arrow goes, people? That circle there, there's two people standing there. Look at the flowstones. In just 55 years. These stalactites in the picture are growing in the garage of a private student condominium near UT campus in Austin, Texas. The name of the condominium complex is Central Condos on the corner of 28th and Rio Grande. This structure was completed in October of 1997. They've had to put up tin pans attached to the two beams of the garage in places so that the stalagmites wouldn't grow on the kids' cars. They parked underneath it, it tripped on the cars, and stalagmites would grow. Thousands of years. This is a teepee fountain, the teepee fountain in Thermopolis, Wyoming. And on the board there it says, this structure started in 1903, was created by piping the hot mineral water through a vertical pipe built into a rock. As the water exits the top and flows over the structure, it cools and deposits travertine, much the same as terraces formed near, and so on and so forth. So they realized, in 1903, this guy realized he had a fountain in his backyard. Stuck a pipe into it, and the water flowed over the top and the sides, and everyone else thought, well, this is just grand, these people have a nice fountain in their backyard. Okay. Over time, it started to deposit minerals on the sides of the pipe. Here it was a few decades later, and here it is 100 years later. It's huge. Did you know that at the current rate of erosion, the continents will erode flat in just 14 million years? Yet, they want us to believe that there are rocks 300 times older than that still above sea level? Erosion marks are all over this world of ours, guys. Look at this picture. Just take satellite pictures. Zoom in a little bit. You'll find that the whole world It's covered in marks of huge erosion, water flowing off. But I will cover more on this in later videos. The oldest writings in the world are about 5,000 years old. Why do you think that is? Why do the Chinese believe that it is today the year 4717? Could they have started counting after the flood? In the year 2000, the Hebrew calendar said it was the year 5760. Maybe they started with Adam. Why are the oldest reliable historical records less than 6,000 years old? Well, there's another theory. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this again. You see, there are much more evidence for a young Earth theory than there are for an old Earth theory. Remember the limiting factors next time somebody tells you something is so old. See? Why aren't students shown the evidence for the universe being young? I think I know why. I think that they want to brainwash our kids to lose their faith. I believe that this is part of a great deception to get everyone in line with their goal of a new world order. Colossians 2 verse 8, it says, "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ." It's everywhere, people. In libraries, museums, movies, documentaries, especially in schools and universities. Everywhere, yet it's a lie. Anyway, that's all we have for today, unfortunately. And it's also the end of this series of In the Beginning. And I want to thank you guys for watching. Unfortunately, there will not be another video for the next 2 weeks. As me and my sons are going on a little bit of a vacation. I will, however, place another short video for you just before Christmas, and I think I want to make this about Christmas. So, yeah, we will resume with a new series called Garden of Eden in the new year. Please remember to tell others about this channel and to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Also, please leave comments, guys. If there's anything unclear or you are in conflict or any of the subject matter bothers you, please, let's talk. Comment. Thanks and goodbye.